So the temporary full-time position continues for certain until July of 2018, I gather, and staff are just being preemptive or if you like, dealing with this in advance. So my question then to staff, could council decide to simply allow the temporary full-time position and its responsibilities that have evolved over that time continue, and then request a report from you as the end of the 2-year extension approaches next spring, and ask for a further report then in terms of statistics? I mean, the statistics are compelling. The number of files that you reported, though, in 2015 and 2014, 2015 is reducing now as I see it in 2016. So I'm not personally convinced yet that we need to convert this to a permanent full-time position. My preference would be to allow the position to continue as it is now and receive a report from staff prior to July of 2018 with a further update and give us some options at that point.
Through the chair, I'm going to start the answer, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Sluchenkov to add to the answer. So this report came forward because it was directed by council. Council requested an update on the property management portfolio, and that's what's before you here today. So that was a requirement as part of the condition of employment, and the approval that council made is that we report annually, and recently council asked for an update on the property management services. So that's why the report is here before you now, because we're reporting annually, and this provides you statistics. With respect to the contract and bringing forward the report in July to consider perhaps the same outcome that is before you tonight, I'd ask Mr. Sluchenkov to speak from a HR perspective on the concerns with that.
Sir, please.
So my two general sentiments, and I think in most circumstances, council wants us to be as proactive as possible. So I would really hate to be in a position where in 2018, where in July or August, and we're in a position where we have an expiring contract and a role that provides tremendous value to this organization. And the report today sort of, we hope, demonstrates the wide variety of activities and work that it does. So we're trying to be proactive in that regard. And the second piece of it, and there's a human component piece, in the sense that you have a specific incumbent in the role, and it goes without saying that contract employment for individuals in specific situations is not very certain, and so we also don't want to be in the precarious position as an employer where we have a human being looking down the element of a contract. So whatever council decides, in our perspective, that should be done sooner rather than later. To the point about the workload, the workload is beyond the numbers, quite honestly, and one-to-one. From what I've seen, and I've spent a significant amount of time talking with the staff about it, the complexity and the amount of work and people hours involved in every single file increases dramatically. Quite honestly, in the 2 months and 3 days that I've been in this organization, there's been very few high-profile issues that have not involved this particular role. So it may be a one tick for we have a new file, but these files are taking incredible amounts of time and an immense amount of hours to complete. So to me, the analysis of the role is significantly more complex than just that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Oliver.
Well, Mr. Chairman, back to Shelley for a moment. I misspoke myself. I was well aware of the required annual updates, and I appreciate that part. My question really was relating to the inclusion of the conversion from temporary to permanent, I guess, at this time, when we hadn't asked for it. So, Mr. Chair, I guess that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Back to you, Mr. Mayor. I think that's where I am.
One last question through you to Mr. Johnson, our treasurer. Does it cause any difficulty in the counting that if we approve, and I'm saying if, I don't know the wishes of council, if we approve that it be 50% funded from the sales or from the income, I guess is the word I'm looking, as opposed to 100% of tax levy? Does that present a problem to you as far as how we pay salaries and do our budgeting?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can account for it quite easily however council desires. It's to adjust our accounting for how this position is funded is not an onerous task. However, having this position funded from a reserve or any position, regular operating salary position funded from a reserve is not something that finance would suggest doing. It's more appropriate to have regular operating expenses funded from the levy and using your reserves for major items such as land purchases. This particular reserve could be used for land purchases. Norfolk does have a history of wanting to acquire land, and we don't have a reserve in place right now for that. We would have to use debentures or something else. So this presents an opportunity to increase our reserve portfolio. As Council may recall, with our July 11th meeting, our reserves are not in good shape, and we need to look at different strategies to improve them. And this is in line with one of those strategies, is to try to improve this reserve in the event that we would decide to do land purchases in the future.
Mr. Chair,
comments,
I
Mr.
don't want to
Mayor?
belabor this. I'm not sure whether council wants to go with the recommendation here. I certainly support everything. I guess my thoughts are, and I'm thinking again about that deer levy. If we're bringing in $200,000 a year, and let's say this was a $100,000 position, I don't believe the amount is in here, but I'm going to just throw that out for round numbers, 100,000. If 50% of it was taken from the revenue it generated, that would be a $50,000 contribution. There still would be 150 going into the reserves. But that's just my thinking, and I
Mr. Mayor,
don't.
why don't you make that?
I would move the recommendation, see where it goes, to get it on the floor, and 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth line, I would say, and further that the property management coordinator position and associated costs be funded 50% from the tax levy, 50% from the reserves, and strike the last statement out.
Thank you.
And we'll see where the debate goes.
Certainly. Any debate on this issue? You've all heard it. All right. Oh, I was almost there. Mayor, Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't necessarily disagree with Mayor Luke on this, but again, and I've heard you, Mr. Chair, do this from time to time. We're now within 5 weeks of 2018, and we're going to be having our operating budget in January. This has implications for the tax levy, obviously, whether it's 50% of the cost or 100% of the cost. I almost feel we should be deferring this matter for consideration at the January budget. Otherwise, again, it'll be a council-approved initiative, and we won't really have another kick at it in January.
Deferral takes precedent over all others? Are you
Mr. Chair,
making
I'll
that?
move a deferral to the January operating budget deliberations,
Thank you.
if I can get a seconder.
Do I have a seconder for
A
deferral?
point of order, I was going to say, Mr. Chair, and I recognize it's your last meeting and you're getting
Thank you.
tired of that job, but it's really hard to defer a motion that doesn't have a seconder. So
What's
maybe
your
I
seconder?
withdraw my motion and just
Oh,
let you
okay.
go with the deferral.
See,
Okay.
you're easy to get along with, Mr.
That's
Mayor.
fine. If,
All right,
you
so
know,
we have-
I don't mind debating it later. It's going to be a long night tonight. I'll support. I'll even second that we defer this.
Thank you
Thank you
much.
very much, and we'll discuss it there.
All right, we have a motion for deferral on the table. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you, staff. Where do we want to go, bud?
Okay, next one will be, actually, it'll be item, it'll be Chief Dix.
We are now going to item D. And Chief Dix, you are going to present this report? Whenever you're ready. We are ready. Whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report tonight was a request from council to look at combining Station 9 in Port Rowan and Station 10 in St. Williams. If council remembers, the last time we were here, we were doing the impact on Station 10. And so I used the same components that we measured the impact on Station 10 to take a look at combining Station 9 and Station 10 in this report. And the first component you see in the report, it talks about the same. We still would like to include our EMS colleagues in this building. Combining the two stations, what we found, we'd have almost 40 personnel just on fire, plus the EMS side. So from our normal footprint that we have for our existing buildings, Mr. Chair, we would need something a little larger, obviously, to accommodate not only the apparatus, but the equipment and the additional staffing. Second point that we talked about is we've talked in council chambers before on NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. And those are the guidelines that are really served throughout North America on getting a number of firefighters in a number of minutes to a location in a % of the time. And what we found in this situation, if we're just looking at the middle, and this was just a plot that we put in, a middle between Station 9 and 10, it's roughly on that lakeshore where it comes and starts to bend down into Port Rowan. And what we found is you're moving your firefighters traveling from St. Williams to their farthest west and from Port Rowan to their farthest east to get to the station, which would impact on response times. We found that just dealing with the St. Williams firefighters would be an additional 2 minutes just to get to the station before they could respond. Through the fire underwriters survey, as council is aware, we had a strategic water supply that was initiated a number of years ago, and we've been certified throughout the county on that water supply. And we did that in the opinion that the stations were going to be where they are, and that's how we based our dry hydrants and our strategic water supply, and we're meeting that. If we change locations of the station into a combined station, we would have to revisit our testing protocol to see if we would meet, and everything's based on water flow and a time. And we know that in our existing certification that we have many residents that are receiving a house insurance reduction because of that. We anticipate that if we did move it, that may affect the house insurance of some of our residents. And more importantly, that I did have a conversation with one homeowner that made me aware that when you remove that level of protection, not only do the house insurance rates, they would lose that, but there's an opportunity that their house mortgage insurance would increase because there is of no fire protection in that area. So that's one of the things we found on the fire underwriters side. There is an opportunity for growth down the road in the Port Rowan, which I shared with you in the report, that will increase by about 266 housing units, which could have an impact on the delivery of services. The Fire Protection and Prevention Act through the Office of the Fire Marshal has every obligation and right to monitor municipalities throughout the province and conduct a review if they see fit. Usually when you close something, it usually raises a red flag and they start taking an interest in what you're doing and can you maintain a service delivery model. So that's always out there for discussion when things like that happen. So when sitting with my senior staff from Station 9 in Port Rowan and our station officers in St. Williams, a couple of components. Would there be a cost savings on combining two stations into one? And perhaps, there would be. We don't know the size that we would need in the combined station. So there may be some cost savings there. But when we looked at response times, could we reduce response times? And so far we see that we wouldn't improve on our response time. And would we increase our service capability, our service delivery by going into one station? We didn't see any efficiencies if we could combine the two stations into one as well. For those reasons, the staff would be recommending that not to combine the two stations at this time. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be open to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Dix, and I'm sure there will be questions. Council? Councillor Black, please.
I don't know, maybe it's too much to ask, and I know I've asked the question before. Even if we were to do nothing, I mean, it would certainly be nice to be able to see exactly Norfolk County and where the ideal place for our combined fire and EMS should be. How could we do something like that so we know that, like in the future, if if a fire hall needs to be replaced, we know already that here's the strategic spot that it needs to be at, rather than sort of just, well, this is where it was and this is where it should be.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we have at times discussed that through council. And one of the things that we found with our existing station locations, predominantly they were put in the areas where the township or the town owned the land, and that's where you end up putting it, and may not have been strategically located. And in this situation, we believe that St. Williams possibly is where it should be, and it's perhaps Port Rowan that we should be actually moving into a different location. And that Station 9 in Port Rowan is not that old by any means. It's probably got 25 or 30 years left. But more importantly, through you, Mr. Chairman, to do a strategic modeling we've discussed in the past would take a third party and a consulting firm to come in and blank canvas it and look at the whole county. So if they choose to reduce stations or add stations, that would be at the discretion of a third party consultant.
And do you know, like, what, I always like to compare with our border municipalities, like in Haldeman, I know I've seen I've seen a few new fire halls, combination EMS. Did they go through a strategic review, or did they hire a consultant to look at where the location should, where the best spot for the location should be?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, not in a outside consultant. They did it themselves. And one of the challenges they had there was over by their bridge. They had one about a kilometer apart from each other. That was really the initiative to combine, to reduce that area there.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Height, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's nothing new here. We've been hearing it from the chief for quite some time now that the hall is required. And for all of the reasons that we've discussed over these last few years, personally, I think it's time to move forward on this without more reports. I believe the fire chief is our best person that we have to give us advice on this, and I take that advice seriously. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll move the motion in the report.
Mayor Luke? All right, so we have a motion on the floor, but before I go to you, Mayor Luke, I did have Councilor Columbus before we put the motion on the floor, so I'd like to go to Councilor Columbus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to Chief Dix. You'd mentioned about cost savings. If you went from 2 stations to 1, would there not be a significant saving down the road for the reduction in fire equipment, fire apparatus, trucks that are costing us $500,000?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, not in equipment or apparatus. What we would do, similar to our Simcoe, Port Dover, and Delhi, we call them 2 pumper stations. In this situation, we would create the 2 pumpers, and we'd have 2 tankers as well. So if anything down the road, maybe a spare tanker, but the other apparatus would be used.
Okay, thank you for that. And in the report, on page 3 of 7 of the report, there's a statement here: to receive the reduced insurance rates, the property owner must be within 8 kilometers from the fire station and within 5 kilometers of the dry hydrant. Is what you're saying is that you could not find a location for a joint fire hall that would meet that standard? Is that it?
Through Mr. Chairman, right now we base those on the existing stations. And when we did the overview to combine Station 9 and 10, not everything married up, because there's 2 parts. It has to be, the resident must be within 5 kilometers of a water supply and 8 kilometers of the fire station. And some were hit and miss on one or the other, but you need both to qualify.
So there was no spot that you could locate?
There were still gaps that of locating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Luke, please.
Well, I just want to say that I appreciate this report. I think staff have looked at this from a number of angles. And the bottom line is this, Mr. Chair, there's nothing in this report that suggests to me that if we were to amalgamate two existing stations into one, and I'm talking just fire protection, that there would be any benefit whatsoever to the residents of that area in respect to response time would not be as good as it is now for most. I mean, obviously, if a new station went next to your home, it might improve your response time. And in the way of assurance, and right now, the St. Williams Fire Station and the Port Rowan Fire Station are meeting the requirements, the mandate, as laid out in the Act, and I see no evidence in here whatsoever that moving to one station is going to make anything better in the way of firefighting in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Brunton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I guess I'm somewhat disappointed in the report. I was hoping to see, there's a lot of, we can't do this, we can't do that because of different regulations, but there's nothing in here that outlines all the potential savings that we might incur if, you know, with, through attrition, maybe downsizing staff and a reduction of equipment, possible sale of land. All those things were cost items that I was hoping to see in the report. The other thing that amazes me, when I talk to different municipalities adjacent to us, this 5 and 8 kilometer radius issue was very clear on the maps we had. I brought them at the last time, and they showed a considerable overlap for St. Williams and Port Rowan. I talked, you know, I know of one, I think it's Selkirk and Jarvis. The distance between those two is substantial. They don't have a problem. They still have 2 fire stations, and they seem to function all right. We moved the Victoria station out to nowhere's land, I guess, considering we put in I believe it's got a dry hydrant out there in that location, but I'm not going to argue the point. I guess, you know, we don't seem to be interested in saving any money when it comes to this type of service, and I believe there was the potential there to do that, so I'll leave it at that, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Sonnenberg?
I promised myself I wouldn't speak to this issue again because I've spoken to it a dozen times over the years to no avail. I have the map that Councilor Brunton was just referring to. We have St. Williams and Port Rowan practically overlapping in its entirety, or in their entirety. And then I go up to my area. Places like Wilsonville, Bealton, Hartford, Rockford, Renton have no coverage whatsoever. Well outside 8 kilometers. What's the logic here? Here we have duplications ad nauseum, and out here we have none.
Would you like the fire chief to respond to that?
Yes, I would like an explanation. How does he...
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe that the map you're looking at is probably one of our first drafts that is not accurate of what we're speaking to. I think that was just based on 5 kilometers from the water source at the time. So that was one of the very first drafts that we went through, and we've evolved into many since that. So there are areas, Mr. Chairman, in the county that are greater than 8 kilometers away from a fire station and 5 from a water source. And in those situations, those homeowners are facing possibly higher mortgage insurance rates because of that. We can't be in the county 100% of the time on all areas, and those are some of the difficulties that we have in providing service.
I give up.
Thank you. Okay, I believe we have a motion on the floor. You know what the motion is? Those in favor? I count 1, 2, 3. Those opposed? I count 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion is lost. Where do we go from here, folks? receive this information. So even if we have a motion to receive the report as information, I think we have to do something with it. Councillor Height,
So moved.
to receive it as information, and Councillor Geisens, we have a motion on the floor to receive this information. You want to speak to the motion? All right. Please.
Councilor Wells, Chairman Wells, thank you very much through you to Chief Dix. Maybe you reported this last time, but what would it cost us to have a third party and do a strategic plan to locate all of the fire EMS? Any ideas?
Through Mr. Chairman, I can't comment for my colleague in EMS, but for fire, you're probably looking at approximately $50,000, $60,000 for a consultant to come in.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brunton.
Well, you know, we spoke briefly about the EMS, and they seem to have a lot bigger radius than the fire. And I wonder, are they not more of a first responder for an emergency? EMS, would they not be? Maybe I'm missing something. I know on a fire, you're going to need a fire truck, but when we have these accidents and the EMS cover a great ground, bigger than 5 or 8 kilometer radius, I believe.
I think Mr. Cridlin would like to speak to that, if that's all right with you.
Sure. I'm not finished yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Cridlin, sit back.
Well, let him speak. I'll speak again after.
Oh, okay. All right. Mr. Cridlin, would you come back and speak?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Brunton. Yes, in the absence of Chief Townsend, I'll do what I can. I think the big thing is the paramedics are full-time. They are at the base 24/7. And I think that in itself cuts the travel time down, whereas a volunteer department, depending on where they live, they could be 8 to 10 minutes to getting to the hall, where our paramedics are, as soon as the call goes on, they're in the truck, they're there. So I think that cuts some of the travel time down. I know it does.
Thank you. And before I get back to you, Councillor Brunton, Chief Dix wishes to also add some information. Chief Dix?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the emergency side, we as fire do not go to all first aid calls and that various nature. We have a modified agreement with our EMS colleagues that it has to be a motor vehicle accident, it has to be spills, it has to be chest pains. We have about 5 or 6 criteria that, depending on the distance for EMS as well, then fire is tiered. So we do not provide that as a first response. We're a modified agreement for that on the first aid side.
Now, Councillor Brunton.
You know, the other night, we had a conversation with some of our fellow colleagues at LPRCA, and somebody mentioned the issue about 20-year life of a fire truck, and I think some of them mentioned that they don't stand by that policy. Now, I don't know if we have a special policy that we have to do that. Anyways, Councillor Black raises a good point. Maybe it's time that we brought in a whole independent to look at this operation. And I'm not saying we got to do it now. Our budget's probably going to be humongous on Thursday. Who knows what it'll be? We've added things here in the last few months, but I hope maybe down the line it's something we have to take a good look at. And if we have an independent body, maybe they'll have a different opinion. Other places do it, and they've certainly cut down on staff and equipment, and seems to function. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Sonnenberg.
Once again, this whole issue has been brought up over the years in order to save the taxpayer some money. I think Port Rowan and that area get good coverage, and they could get the same good coverage with one station. But I think this problem, Mr. Chair, is going to solve itself someday, because with the price of firefighting equipment, we're not going to be able to afford any extra hauls. We're going to have to close some eventually, because I think the last time we bought a fire truck, it was $850,000. I'm guessing the next one's going to be $950,000, and then we're going to be over the $1 million mark. The taxpayer cannot afford this kind of fire protection. We're much too fancy, much too expensive, and it's going to die on its own.
Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, we will move on with our agenda, please. And the Deputy Clerk has informed me that the next one she would like us to go to is because it's the donation of funds to purchase the fire safety hazard house, page 47. Well, we have Mr. Pipe here. All right. We have a mover and a second, all in favor of receiving this as information. For golly's sake here, thank you. Well, thank you very much. And after this meeting, you can keep me as honest as you want, because I'll be sitting out there. Go ahead, Mr. Pipe. I think you have a report, or Mr. Cridlin, you're going to introduce them and then turn it over?
That is correct. Through the chair, I do appreciate the change in the agenda. Mr. Pipe has to be in Delhi tonight for some training, so this helps him out. And I'd also, I know there was an email went out, but I think we need to formally introduce Mr. Pipe here. Former fire prevention officer, was successful when with the retirement of Dennis Friesen. He is now the new assistant fire chief. And we're very happy to have him on staff. And with that, this is Scott's first council report, so I will turn it over to Mr. Pipe.
And congratulations on your promotion. Now you get to speak. Go ahead, please.
Through the chair. One of the jobs of the fire prevention officer is to make an assessment of the fire safety needs of the community. And once you make an assessment of the fire safety needs of the community, you have to create programming to address those needs. And sometimes you have to find sources of funding to help pay for those programs. We had a fire safety trailer in Norfolk County, and it was a phenomenal tool. It was used to great effect, taught a lot of children, thousands of children, the importance of fire safety and fire safe behavior. But unfortunately, the fire safety trailer is getting old and needs to be replaced. But I'm proud to report to council that we found a cost-effective tool that we believe will be effective in reaching our children in the near future. Our community partners were able to generously donate $10,000 towards the purchase of this inflatable fire safety house. The balance of the funds to purchase this inflatable fire safety house will come out of our existing fire prevention materials budget. This inflatable safety house will bring savings to taxpayers because we don't have to have storage for this inflatable house, and there's very little to no maintenance costs for this inflatable house as well. And we're excited about the potential that this tool can bring to our community in the area of fire safety. I'm open for any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Columbus.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to hear that the fire safety trailer has saved its purpose, and it's unfortunate that it is in the condition it's in, I guess. And of course, what's being proposed, there are other savings. But the question I have to Mr. Pipe, and I know he's expecting this question because we talked about it earlier, is you're looking for taking some coffers from the county levy, I guess it is. And what if other organizations wanted to contribute and top up the community partners' contribution? I know the motion says that $5,000 would be coming from tax levy, but what if some other organization came up and offered $5,000? How would you handle that?
Through the chair, I'm always grateful for community partners, and if someone was willing to step forward and make an additional donation, we'd absolutely be very grateful for that.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Brunton.
Just out of curiosity, like, do you have any training or fire prevention things that you handle with students on school buses by chance?
Through the chair, that would be something that the OPP would primarily address in the schools themselves. We deal mostly with general fire safety tips, lighters and matches, home escape planning, and things like that.
Well, the reason I say that, I frequently on the news you see where school buses get hammered and they catch fire, and you see that in the States considerably for, at least I've watched at different times where these kids are fortunate to get out of a school bus when they get broadsided or whatever. But I'm wondering if that's something part of the training we could do. I mean, look at the kids we have on school buses throughout Norfolk County. There's probably all kinds of them, and I'm just wondering, for fire safety, would that not be something we could take on as a training thing for students?
Through the chair, I think that that's a good suggestion, and I'd be more than willing to have that conversation with our fire safety educators and look at adding that to our program. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, and we do not have a motion on the floor yet, so before we do, I'd like to ask a question. And the question I have is, we are within a month of doing our budget. Why could this not be included as a request in your budget presentation?
Through the chair, we have $5,000 in our existing budget that we're going to use towards this, so that's why we didn't bring it forward in the budget for next year.
So there is no budget implications?
No, there is no budget
thank
implications.
You. Who is
it's this year?
Mayor Luke? I do. And Councillor
Chair.
Columbus is seconding that. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Go forth with your new and good luck. Merry Christmas. All right, where are we going now, Madam Clerk?
So if committee's okay, then we will go to this item. It's DCS 1789 and Mary Elder Hammer here.
We would like to change the agenda here, folks. We're going to go to Staff Report DCS 1789, the 5-year official plan review, and I believe we have some guests here to present that. And that's found on page 61, please. We still got a lot to do. So I think when we finish this, we're going to have to recess for 10 minutes.
Sure.
That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. When we finish this, we're going to have to recess. Ms. Elder, will you be presenting this report?
To the chair, I will do an introduction and a
thank you very
summary,
much.
but in the middle, we're going to have our consultant present.
We'd be glad to have you take it away whenever you wish.
So after council direction on our track changes version of the draft amendments of the official plan, we sent them off to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs for review in June. On October the 12th, we received the comments back, and they're certainly very detailed, but very thorough, and in many places, they clarify wording which will help us in the future. Some of them are technical updates, but some of them are also about consistency with the provincial policy statement. So I'm going to turn it over now to Matt Reniers to talk about some of the more details, the things that we think council would want to give us some direction on.
To you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll start off with the comment from the Ministry on climate change. It is a provincial policy that official plans have regard to climate change. There are policies in the official plan today, and we're adding some additional policies that have an impact on climate change or adaptation to climate change, but they suggested that there be more policies added. It's hard to add too much to the official plan without a community-wide strategy on climate change, because the official plan is really only one aspect of implementing a strategy. But we did identify a number of policy changes that we could add to the proposed amendment to the official plan. One would be to work with the agricultural community in identifying the potential impact of climate change on that sector. Agriculture is very climate dependent, and any work that maybe can be done with that sector would be of value. And other policy changes basically has to do with stormwater management, so that one of the impacts of climate change is more severe storms and higher frequency of severe storms, and to have that considered in design of stormwater management facilities. Also in any infrastructure that the county may construct in the future, that in the engineering of those facilities, that potential impacts of climate change are taken into account. So that's basically what we're doing with the ministry's request to do more of the climate change. Based on our meeting with them, we tossed those ideas out. I think that might satisfy that request. More significant change that they wanted has to do with comment number 8, and it deals with the agricultural area. The Ministry of Agriculture and Food, Rural Affairs basically are of the opinion that all land outside of settlement areas in the county are prime agricultural areas. It's recognized that some lands are class 4 or lower in terms of agricultural potential, but the predominance is class 1 to class 3 lands. So all of the lands outside of the urban areas and hamlet areas, and they're questioning the resort areas, were considered to be prime agricultural lands. And they would want to see just an agricultural designation on those, on all that land. Now, in the agricultural area, outside of the settlements, we do have an institutional designation. That's a high school south of Langton. We have a number of parks and open space designations, golf courses, soccer fields, conservation lands, that kind of thing. We also have hazard lands and provincially significant wetlands. They would prefer that those types of uses be in an overlay map, an overlay designation, and any of the parks and open space sites and institutional designations, and that would be a site-specific policy area within the agricultural designation. That is going beyond really what we talked about, or the terms of reference for the official plan review. We never envisioned going back to all of those designations and looking at them again. Also, I think are of the opinion that the official plan land use map should tell a very clear picture of what is permitted and not permitted, and using the overlay approach, I think, makes the plan harder to understand. So our approach or suggestion to them is that we don't want to go through that approach, but we will deal with it in the policy. And the suggested policy is to have a designation in, or a term called other uses, that recognizes that there are these other designations in the rural area or agricultural area, and any changes in land use to those properties or to those designations would go through the similar tests that would be required under the provincial policy statement, but we would keep the land use designations as they are. So that's the approach that we're recommending that council adopt. Another issue is our infill intensification target. The current target in the official plan is that 20% of development be through infilling or intensification. They suggested that that be bumped up. We've agreed to recommend that it be moved up to 25%. It's a modest increase, but I think with the other amendments in the plan, there's probably more opportunity for intensification than there has been in the past. Halton County has, at this point in time anyways, has an infill target of 32%. So we're still below that. We had in the draft plan recommendations or policy suggestions dealing with the issue of lot swaps. That was rejected by the ministry. They say that's their opinion is it's against the, not permitted under the provincial policy statement, and they're not supporting that. In terms of industrial designations, we are supporting 2 industrial expansions, one in Delhi for Scott's, and another one in Cortland for Titan Trailers. And those are expansions into the agricultural area. They would like to see a quid pro quo. So for any acreage or land that we take out of the urban area for those uses, we add back somewhere else into the agriculture. And in the staff report, there are some suggestions as to how that can be done. One other thing, going back to the agricultural areas, there was some confusion by the ministry as to whether resort areas are settlement areas. And that has significance in terms of potential changes of use within the resort area. And the plan was, we went back through the plan, and there's some contradictory statements, that whether they were a settlement area or not. What we're doing is recommending that it be quite clear in the plan that resort areas are settlement areas, so that they're not out of the agricultural realm. I think the other point is that the ministry went through all the hamlet boundary adjustments, all the technical adjustments that were made, as well as the adjustments that were made at the council meeting regarding additional development opportunities within the hamlets. And quite a few of the technical ones were accepted. Not all, but quite a few of them were. But the boundary adjustments that allows for additional development in the hamlets as a whole were not supported by the ministry. So,
Mr. Chair, then, in summary, Council may not agree with some of the comments that have come from the ministry or some of the things that the staff have suggested, and that's fine, but we wanted to point out the implications. So if we don't amend according to the proposed texted schedules, MMA is the approval authority. So whatever document we finally send, whatever official plan we do send to them, they have an opportunity to modify it if they feel strongly about something. And then what will happen is when they have finished modifications, the approved document would come back to the county, and that would be like your notice of decision. It's kind of the final thing. So then the appeal period would start, and then appeals could be launched against the plan, either from ourselves, from other people in the community. So I just wanted to remind you of that reality. And then I wanted to mention the next steps that we have in this process, because we are in the final phase of getting to our updated official plan. With council's agreement tonight, if you feel we're ready, we would stage an open house so that people could look at the comments and the policies, and that would be on Wednesday, December the 6th. And then on Tuesday, January the 16th, we would have the statutory public meeting, providing the community an opportunity to speak again about the proposed changes before council adopts the bylaw. In conclusion then, the provincial review has been thorough and detailed. Many of the comments are of an updating or clarity nature and should be adopted. Others we need council direction from, and those are the things that Matt Reniers has spoken about. We would appreciate direction from council on all the settlement expansions where the province is of the opinion they are not consistent with the PPS, but particularly the industrial designations. And that's why in the report we provided some options for council to consider. You may also have other comments that you want to discuss, and that's certainly your prerogative to do. Depending upon council's direction, then, we would proceed with the open house and the public meeting. So I leave it now to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Columbus, please. We'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few here to start with. The 10-year surplus farm dwelling, was that accepted by the municipal affairs people, where we put a rolling date on it rather than a 30-year date that we've had?
Through the chair, yes, it was.
Okay, thank you. On page 3 of 11 of the report, it says, climate change can potentially have a major impact on agricultural production. Is that a negative impact or a positive impact?
Through Mr. Chair, I'm not an expert on climate change, but my understanding it can go both ways. It might make it possible to grow crops that are not grown here now, but it might bring pests and other things that might migrate with the warmer temperatures. So I'm not sure what the impact is, but I think it's something that the county may want to work with the agricultural community and the agriculture advisory committee and come to terms with what that potential impact might be.
Because I see that as potentially a positive change, not negative. You know, we're experiencing an extended growing season for a lot of crops in a frost-free period. And now we've got grapes introduced locally here with high-value crop. We've got sweet potatoes and a lot of other crops. So I see that as a positive change for Norfolk County rather than a negative. And the other one I wanted to focus on was this chart that I see on page 9 of the report. It's with respect to industrial land. We've got Delhi there. This is the Scott's fertilizer plant or mulch plant. 4.05 hectares that they want included in the industrial that is currently agricultural. But we would have to give up 7.6 hectares. And then the other one, there was another one where we'd have to give up considerably as much also. Just wonder, would they balk at that, or can we cut that back rather than give up 7.6 hectares for moving 4.5 from agriculture to industrial?
Through the chair, the column that says the area council proposed adding, that's where the 5.05 hectares is for Scott's. The other column that's on the right is areas that could be considered for removal, and that's just some options that staff has prepared for you to consider, and there's maps at the back of the report that show where those areas are. So it's not necessarily taking it from Scott's, it's another area in town that's identified later in the report. It's over in the the area don't zone development off of, I'm not going to have the right name in my head right now, but that's what it's about. It's Wilson Avenue and the corner of Fertilizer Road.
Right, but why would we remove more, quite a bit more, higher percentage than what we're moving from agriculture to industrial?
Through the chair, staff was just trying to present some options for council to consider. 1, 2, 3, or none of it. You may say, we're not doing any of this. We just thought we would put in front of you some options so that you could decide what you'd like to do. And it's to do with the 18 hectares. If you were doing all of Titan and Scott's, where do you take it from if you agree to the ministry's idea that there should be no net loss in agriculture? So the right column gives you some choices, and it totals to more than, but it's to give you some options.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Height, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It talks about on here that we set a minimum target for infill and intensification and redevelopment within the urban area boundary built at 25%. And comment number 18, I guess they're okay with keeping it at 20%. But what happens if are you allowed to go over that? Or does that it? We stop, no more development. Once it hits 20%, go home.
To you, Mr. Chair, you can definitely go over that. That's, it's not a limit. It's a target, but you can exceed it.
Okay, so where's the rest of the 80%?
The rest of the land would be taken, basically, other land within the settlement areas that are beyond what is built today. There's, through basically plans of subdivision at the edge of the urban area.
So through the chair, you're talking mostly the 5 urban centers of Norfolk County?
To Mr. Chair, basically the 4. I'm not recommending that target in Cortland because it's not on full services. So it'd be in the other 4 urban areas.
Okay, so like from the time that this has gone to them for comment and come back, have we done a lot inventory yet?
To Mr. Chair, through the residential monitoring report, we did a lot inventory within each of the urban areas and within each of the hamlet areas.
So in that lot inventory, have you actually looked to see that the lots or something could be built on them?
To Mr. Chair, yes. Particularly, the things that were taken into consideration were hazard lands, provincially significant wetlands. Those are areas that were not considered potential development. So any lot that was severely constrained by that kind of by that kind of situation would not be considered as potential development. So it was considered.
Okay, so is there a report or something that you can show council? I know for a fact there's tons of these lots out there that could be taking up inventory that are not buildable. And I would like to see a summary of lots in the rural, lots in different hamlets, lots that you can't build on. Because I think that ties us up.
The summary of the table that summarized the hamlet review of lots is summarized in the residential monitoring report, and that table is based on mapping for each of the hamlet areas, which